In the previous video, we've created a set of classes for our subquery pivot vocabulary, which is going to be used with our SQL statement. In this video, we are going to write some tests to cover these classes. So if we scroll down, go to the tests, unit database statement. Within a statement directory, we're going to create a new directory called subquery. And within this directory, we are going to start with a new class called pivot equals test. And this test needs to extend a test case. And we are going to be testing this pivot equals class. So if you open this class doesn't have anything. So it's technically just testing what our pivot, abstract pivot class have. Obviously, we cannot test abstract classes because we cannot instantiate it. But because we have this class that extends it, this is going to be our entry point. And obviously, pivot equals works with this operand, which is the equal symbol anyway. Okay, so I'm going to close both of these. We are going to start with a public function called returns correct underscore statement. And let's make it a test by adding the test tag. And here we're going to start with a query. So query equals new pivot equals, and let's import it because it's quite a long namespace here. Okay, and here we're going to put some arguments. First one is going to be the table name, so author book. Then we're gonna go for book ID field and then author ID. And we're going to see in just a moment what this actually does when we pass these arguments through, because obviously we've created all these methods within the pivot class, but we're not quite sure what's happening here yet. Okay, so now we are going to go for the SQL statement. This is what we're going to expect to receive. So select book ID from author book table, and then where author ID equals question mark. So that's what we should receive. And we're going to run this assert equals, and we want to assert that our SQL statement is what we get when we run query and then query method on it. Otherwise, we want to return a message pivot equals method query returned invalid statement and semicolon at the end. Now, one thing I want to do here, because the spacing, new lines and that sort of things might be different than what this pivot equals returns when we're comparing against our statement here. So what I want to do is to remove any double spaces, for instance, and any new lines, so that both of these match when it comes to any spacing and new lines and so on. Okay, and to do this, let's create a new method within the test case, because we might be using this with some other tests as well. It's going to be protected function called trim white space, and it will take a string as an argument. It will return trim, so we're trimming whatever we are going to first replace with the preg replace function as well. So preg replace. And here the pattern for the replacement is going to be, the first one is going to be / and then new line with multiple spaces, so s plus and then / So that's the first pattern. And the other pattern that regex basically that we want to look for is going to be simply multiple spaces and /. And what we want to replace these two with, again, within the array, for the first item, for this new line and multiple spaces, we want to replace it with nothing, without any space basically, or new line. And the second one, if there are multiple spaces, with a single space. So that's how we want to replace it within our string. And that's what we're going to return from here. And then at the end, obviously, because we are wrapping this preg replace with the trim function, which will strip any white space from left and right hand side. So that's our trip white space method. Let's just add some doc block here. It takes string, which is of a string type, and then trim new lines and multiple white spaces. Okay, we can save it and close this file, and now let's use it here within our test. This trim with white space, and let's wrap this SQL variable with it. The same for the trim white space with the query. And if we now save it and run the test, if we call just this file, so PHP unit tests unit database statement subquery, and then we have pivot equals test, and there we go, one test, one assertion, which is passing. So that means that our pivot equals class returns the correct statement. Okay, the next one we're going to be testing, if we just scroll up a little bit, we have this pivot exists in and pivot exists equals. We're going to start with pivot exists equals, so we can close this one, we can close this pivot as well. Within the subquery, we're going to create another directory to indicate which directory it's actually within. Exists, which is where these two classes that we're going to be testing now are located. Within this subquery, we actually could create the pivot as well to indicate exactly what it is, because we've got subquery, then we have pivots, pivot equals, and exists. So let's move these tests to this pivot directory. So another directory within a subquery, pivot, and now if we just move this exist directory and pivot equals test to it, so that it reflects actually the structure of our component here as well. Okay, within the exist one, we're going to create this new class called pivot exists equals test. And again, this one is going to extend test case. And here we're going to create the same test, public function returns correct statement. And let's make it a test straight away. And here we're going to start with a query as well, equals new pivot exists equals. And let's import it as well. So we've got this use statement here right at the top. Then semicolon at the end, obviously. And here we are going to put author book, which is the table, then field book underscore ID, author ID, and then books full stop ID. And now what the statement should be when we actually call query and query method on it, it's going to be SQL equals select book ID from author book where author ID equals question mark and book ID equals books ID. This is what we should receive. And before we actually write this assert equals, let's quickly have a look at actually what's happening, because we haven't done it with the pivot equals first. Let's try with this pivot equals. Okay, if I go to this pivot equals, obviously we don't have any code here. We're only extending the pivot class, and let's have a look at what's going to happen when we actually instantiating this. So when we're instantiating, we pass in the table name, select field, and where field. So let's have a look at this test. Table name, author book, field name, select field, and then where field, which is what the statement is going to contain. So select, which is the select field, so book ID, from table author book here, and then where the field author ID equals question mark. Equals because we are using the operand here, and by default the operand is equals. And as you may remember, we're not overwriting this operand from within pivot equals. That's why the statement is going to be exactly the way we have it displayed here. And this is why this obviously assertion here passes. Now for the second one, now we are dealing with the exists pivot exists classes. Here we're passing four statements, four arguments rather. If I just open this pivot exists, the main one, the abstract class, you can see that we've added the fourth field. So the first three fields are exactly the same way as for the main pivot class, because later on we are calling this constructor here and passing these three arguments through. So it works exactly the same way as here. But then, if I just go to pivot exists, we are also adding this auto field, which is then concatenated with the end after this main statement from the pivot class, and then select field, again taking the second argument which we're passing through, so this book ID, so and book ID equals this auto field. And we obviously using this, let's just go back to this pivot exists, we're using this field name to split it. In a previous video, obviously we've done it, to split it accordingly based on how many full stops we have within this fourth argument. So book's full stop ID is then converted into using this backticks, the table within the backticks concatenated with the ID within the backticks. So that's how all this works. So I'm going to open back this pivot equals test, and I'm going to copy this assertion here because it's pretty much the same, and paste it within this test. The only difference is going to be the name of the class that we're actually using for the message in case it failed. So pivot exist equals query returned invalid statement. Let's now run this test. Back to the terminal, PHP unit tests unit database, then we have statement subquery, then we have pivot, then exists, and then we have pivot exists equals test. And when we run it, we have a problem here. As you can see, it tells us that it's not quite what we're after. And this is because this, as you can see, the hyphen indicates what we're expecting to have, and plus indicates what we're actually getting. So this is what we are getting, and this is what we are expecting to get, which isn't quite what we're actually expecting to get. Because if you have a look at this, after this book ID, we don't have any space before this from. We also have the same problem actually with the one that we are getting. Then after the author book, we don't have, before this where statement, we don't have any space. Before end, we don't have any space, and so on. So our expected and actual should have a space between the field name and then the from keyword, the same between the author book and where keyword. And then for the expected, we should also have space between this question mark and end keyword. So how are we going to fix it? Well, the reason why we're actually getting this sort of result is because of this method which we've used here, the stream white space. And I've just noticed that probably when we have in a new line and multiple spaces, we should not replace it without any space, but with the same as the second item in this replacement array, which is basically a single space. So rather than having the array here as a second argument, I'm just going to replace it with the single string, which is basically a single space. So both of these will replace the items, whatever they match. Basically here it's going to be a new line with multiple spaces, and here any multiple spaces, they all going to be replaced with a single space. So if we save it and run the test now, I'm just going to clear the screen here on the Mac with Command K, run the test again, and there we go. Now this test passes. Just to make sure that the previous test also passes, which uses this method, let's just run it, and rather than pivot exists, now we're going to point to pivot equals test, and there we go, that passes as well. So as you can see, by replacing this basically second argument to this break replace, we've fixed our problem. Okay, so let's save and close this file. We've now completed this pivot exists equals test as well, so we can close it. We can close this pivot equals test and all these other classes. Now within the exist one, the next test is going to be for the pivot exists in. So pivot exists in test, and again this one is going to extend test case, and we're going to start with the same method name. So public function returns correct statement, make it a test, and then query equals new pivot exists in, and let's import it. And then we are going to pass for arguments again, author underscore book, then book ID for the select field, author ID for the where field, and then for the end statement within the where clause, we're gonna go for books ID as well. Then SQL statement that we are actually expecting to get is going to be select book underscore ID from author book, the first argument that we're passing through, and then where statement, where author ID, which is a third argument, equals, not equals now it's going to be in, and question mark, and then end book ID equals books ID. And I'm again going to open the previous test, copy this assertion here, paste it within this test, and just replace the name of the class. Okay, if we run this test, I'm going to run through this in just a moment. So again, PHP unit test, unit database statement, subquery, then we have pivot exists in test, and there we go, it passes. So if we go back to the editor, now let's have a look at what we have in here. Now pivot exists in. If I open this class, you can see that the operand now is being overwritten with in keyword. That's why here, rather than equals, which was the case with the pivot exists in, pivot exists equals, now we have this in for the operand. So where author in, and then question mark. And then we have obviously the same thing as we had before with this exists equals. If we just open this exists in, pivot exists, when we add in this end statement with the select field, which is this second argument, and then author field formatted the same way with this field name method on the field class, which is giving us basically same result as in the previous test. So that's also done. So we can save and close this file. We can save and close all other files, and all our tests for the pivot classes are now completed, and we are ready to move to the next video.